Today, we're looking up. But we're not just looking at the moon as a beautiful light in the sky. We're looking at it as the next great frontier. For resources, for power, and for a geopolitical showdown that has some really deep and pretty troubling historical echoes for the entire African continent.
Right now, as you're listening to this, 4 astronauts are up there circling the moon on NASA's Artemis 2 mission. It's the first time in over 50 years that people have gone beyond low Earth orbit. And while the world watches in awe, many in Africa are all too aware that they had absolutely no say in writing the rules for what happens next.
And that really is the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Who owns the water ice that could be turned into rocket fuel? Who owns the helium-3 that could power our planet with clean energy? Who owns all the rare minerals locked away in the lunar soil? This is so much more than a science mission. This is the starting gun for a new resource race.
You know, it's easy to get caught up in the pure excitement of space travel, but that often hides the fierce competition that's bubbling just under the surface. Because this isn't just about exploration anymore. It's about law, it's about power, and it's about resources.
And that's where you see the real disconnect. You've got this incredible mission happening up in the cosmos, but the legal framework that's going to govern everything they find? Well, that was drafted by just a handful of nations, thousands of miles away. For a lot of people in Africa, this story feels very familiar.
So to really understand why this is such a make-or-break moment, we have to rewind the clock a bit and look at the foundation of space law itself. And that story starts right in the middle of the Cold War.
You can really break it down into 3 key documents that have shaped how we think about space. Each one comes from a different era, with a totally different set of priorities, and a different vision for who gets to cash in on the final frontier.
Okay, so it all starts with the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. This thing is the bedrock. It was negotiated by the US and the Soviet Union, and it has this one very noble-sounding idea at its core. The moon belongs to everyone. No country can go up there, plant a flag, and call it their own. Sounds pretty good, right?
Well, here's the catch, a huge one. The treaty says you can't own the land, but it says pretty much nothing about taking stuff from the land. Can you just show up, start digging, and take the minerals home? You know, back in '67, that was science fiction. Today, it is very, very real.
So in 1979, an attempt was made to close that loophole. It was called the Moon Agreement. It said lunar resources are the common heritage of mankind and that everyone should share the benefits. African nations, and really the whole global South, were behind this idea. But the United States? Not so much. It never signed, and in fact has officially rejected its main principles.
So with that whole common heritage idea basically thrown out by the US, a totally new framework was created, one that was specifically designed for this new era of lunar exploration.
Okay, it's really important to understand what the Artemis Accords are, and maybe more importantly, what they are not. They are not a UN treaty that the whole world negotiated together. They were drafted internally by NASA and the US State Department. It's basically an invitation to join America's awesome space club, but only if you agree to play by America's rules first.
And when you look at who's in the club, the result is, well, it's a pretty stark imbalance. As of early 2026, you've got 61 nations that have signed on, but out of 54 countries in Africa, only 4 have joined. It just shows you how far outside this new framework the continent is. Yeah, as you can probably guess, this whole approach has drawn some really sharp criticism. Russia called it a US-centric power play. And as you can see right here, Chinese state media didn't pull any punches, drawing a direct and very provocative line to colonial history.
So why all the legal maneuvering? What is actually at stake that's worth all this trouble? The answer is a treasure trove of resources on a scale that is just hard to wrap your head around.
I mean, we're talking about water ice that can be turned into rocket fuel, basically making the moon a gas station for the entire solar system. There's helium-3, a perfect, clean fuel for fusion energy. Just one space shuttle's worth could power the entire US for a year. And then, of course, all the rare earth minerals that literally everything in our modern world is built on. So how do you lock down access to all this stuff? Well, the Accords introduced this pretty controversial idea called safety zones. On paper, they're to prevent accidents. But in practice, if you're the one with the tech to get to the moon and start digging, you can declare a protected zone around your mine that nobody else can enter. It's not technically a claim of ownership, but it sure functions like one.
And that dynamic of powerful nations writing rules that just so happen to benefit the people who can get there first, while everyone else is left on the sidelines, that has a historical parallel that every single African nation recognizes immediately.
Think about it. In 1884, European powers gathered in Berlin to carve up Africa for themselves. No Africans were invited. The rules were written by the colonizers for the colonizers. Now, fast forward to today, the rules for the moon are being written in Washington, D.C., and they're being offered as a take-it-or-leave-it deal. The pattern is chillingly familiar.
You see, the argument back in 1884 was that African nations just didn't have the ability to exploit their own resources, so it was fair game. But as this quote puts it so powerfully, just because you can't get to it yourself right now doesn't mean you have no claim to it. And that is the absolute core of Africa's argument today.
So, is it a done deal? Is history just doomed to repeat itself, but this time in space? Well, not necessarily. The window of opportunity is closing fast, for sure, but it is not shut just yet.
Experts have laid out a pretty clear path forward. First, the continent has to speak with one voice through the African Union. Second, individual countries need to pass their own national space laws. Third, they have to use their collective voice at the UN to fight for a real, binding international treaty. And finally, they need to remember the lessons from the recent past, like how the rules of the internet were written without them, leading to a new kind of data colonialism.
Because that's the reality of the situation. Right now, at this very moment, the rules that will govern the future of the moon for all of us are being hammered out in a handful of capital cities. They're not being decided in Nairobi or Lagos or Accra. They're being decided in Washington, Beijing, and Moscow.
Africa has seen this exact story play out before, on its own soil. The only difference is that this time it's all happening out in the open, on a brand new frontier, for the whole world to see. The only question left is whether seeing it happen is enough to make people act before the new maps of the moon are drawn for good.